Ambassador Force. Thank you to our guests for being with us this morning. And it's really hard to believe that we're at the last meeting of the year. And Steve and I were coming in together and we were talking about just the little chill that's in the air. And I think that might be appropriate, a week or so before Thanksgiving. When we might need to move from summer into something other than summer. And I want to thank you as people who care about Grady. We have had great interactions. We've learned a lot about Grady, and we know that access to health care is a critical one. And as we have a lot of conversations, given where we are in this season, in terms of our most recent election and the conversations that are occurring around the Affordable Care Act, Grady may need to be even more of a safety net than they've been in the past. So I know that the importance of this hospital will not diminish anytime soon. And we're people who care about Grady. That's why you're here. That's why you're here at 7:30 in the morning. And our community absolutely does need to understand the issues and pay close attention to the debate about health care. And that debate is really going to be picking up. So I know that all of you, I hope, appreciate the opportunity to hear what's on the slate and what kind of conversations may occur and will be occurring, and we want to be sure that you as ambassadors of this great institution understand what the healthcare situation is, the importance of Grady, and what we need to know, because as an ambassador, you're truly an advocate for this hospital, an advocate for the work that's done here. So we don't need to be the silent majority, I think is what they say. We want to be part of the very vocal majority, understanding what a difference a place like Grady makes and what our role is in making sure that everyone is aware of it. So I'd like to introduce Renee Blumenthal, who is doing exceptional work here at Grady, and she will introduce our guest.
Quickly, I'll go quickly. Thank you, Jerry, and also thank you, John Hartman. They're our co-chairs. You'll hear from John at the close of our program. Also want to mention Mr. Pete Correll has joined us this morning. Thank you so much.
The late Mr. Correll.
His name is synonymous with modern Grady, and we're grateful to him. We've also been joined by Sam and Angie Allen. Thank you, and thank you all too. I'll echo Jerry. Thank you for coming out on 7:30. We did change the time. Thank you for paying attention. I know this has been a tough week. Everyone's kind of bleary-eyed from the election, so thank you in particular for being here at 7:30. I also want to Dr. Ree introduced himself, and now this is where I'm going to embarrass him. Dr. Peter Ree is new to Grady. He came this summer, and we're very thrilled. He is Grady's first chief of the trauma center as a Grady physician, not necessarily Emory or Morehouse. He comes to us most recently from the University of Arizona, and he ran the trauma center there. And some of you may remember Congresswoman Gabby Giffords when she was shot in a shopping center parking lot, and there were other casualties. This was her trauma surgeon, and led the trauma team at the time. I'm sorry, I'm embarrassing you. And, he just has such a fabulous personal story. Immigrant from South Korea, his parents immigrated to the United States, went to Georgia Tech, went to medical school, served in Iraq and Afghanistan for the U.S. Navy, so it's an incredible story. And how cool is that we have right here in Atlanta, Georgia, and right here at Grady, that we were able to attract. Hello to him, give him a warm Atlanta and ambassador welcome. And Dr. Ree, thank you for joining the Ambassador Force meeting. We're thrilled to have you. It has been a very, very, very busy year for the foundation. I can't believe the year is almost up. A couple things we would ask you to do. If you look on the back of your agenda, as Jerry said, the chill is getting in the air, so that means it's the holiday time is coming up. We do something every year called Adopt a Department. And basically, these are the different departments of the hospital, a burn center, a cancer center. They have wish lists of things that don't necessarily make it into the hospital operating budget. These are things to make our patients and their families stay here just a little bit nicer. So these are things that they use, like the coloring books that y'all did. Having coffee makers and Keurig K-cups in the lounges. Things that just make our patient experience even better. Those are the kinds of things on the wish list that just, again, help enhance our patient care. Please, as you do think about the holidays and giving back, take a look. It's so easy. You just have to go to Amazon, click, and by the way, too, if you go to Amazon Smile, it also a portion of the proceeds come back to Grady, so you can kind of be double and tripling or leveraging your effort. Also, as you think about the holidays and giving back, many of you think about giving to organizations at this time of year. Please consider Grady as one of your giving opportunities. Any gift of any size is always welcome, so thank you for that. So, in light of this week, we're very excited about the program this morning, and I'm trying to go quick so we can get to it, because it's going to be all about politics and how healthcare is going to fit into those politics at the federal, state, and local level. Before we do that, we have something fun for y'all to do during this meeting. First of all, get out your cell phones. This is one of those rare meetings where they say, take out your phones, we want you to be on your phones, because we're going to ask you some questions throughout the morning. So get ready. Okay, everybody get your phones out. Get on the text part of your phone. And first thing you do, text to the number 22333. So in the to line, and just go to your text and create a new text and put 22333 in the to line. And then in the message part, put Grady 1 and hit send. Okay. Yeah, oh yeah, we'll leave that up there. So text Grady 1 to the number 22333. And when you do, you should get a message back that says, you've joined Fritz Michelle's session. That's our database manager's name, by the way, and Fritz. You're going to join his session. Everybody with us? Okay, all right, so you got that message? Okay, great. So you are ready for the first question. Okay, oops, I missed it. Okay, in one word, describe your experience so far as a Grady Ambassador Force member. Any words you want to put. And then just type it in and then hit send.
Type Grady.
You can do your responses.
Grady 1.
You can do it if you want to after you hit send. If you thought of another word, you can go ahead. We'll let you have more than one. And be honest too. You can be honest. Don't tell us what you think we want to hear. You can be honest. How about that?
Okay. Now, it's asking what it says. In one word.
Okay, we'll give it another like 20 seconds. All right, this is awesome. So enlightening looks like that's a big one for
Look up
folks.
there and find your word.
They do, yes, yeah. So the bigger the word means that's how many more people have said that word. Okay, awesome. Thank y'all. Okay, ready for another one? Okay, good. Is everybody awake now? Okay, one more. Okay, since I've joined the Ambassador Force, I've engaged with Grady by telling my friends about Grady. I've made a contribution, I've written a check, I've donated items like the coloring books and the gloves we did last winter. I've attended events like today, and then just other.
All of the above.
Well, so here's the thing, you can do more than one. So, but do it one at a time. So let's say if you've made a contribution, type in B and hit send, and then go back and do another one.
Oh, one at a time.
And again, be honest. We'll give this another 10 or 15. Okay, good. You ready for the next one before we get to our panel? We got one more, and then we're going to have some more throughout the meeting, so you better pay attention. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being very likely, as an Ambassador Force member now, how more likely are you to just openly and proactively share information about Grady with your friends or coworkers or others? So if you want to do very likely 5, type in an A. If you want to do 4, the next level of very likely, type in a B. Does that make sense? This is really a test to see what you can do at 7:30 in the morning. And again, be honest, be honest. Wow, this is awesome.
keep saying, be honest, you sound like the posters.
Cool. Okay, so while we're doing the last few responses to that, thank you so much for thank you for playing. You get to play some more in a minute. As Jerry mentioned, we're here today to learn more about the challenges facing Georgia with regard to healthcare access, and I think that's even been more heightened in light of this week's election. And we're very fortunate to have speakers who are leading that conversation with us this morning. So I'd now like to introduce one of your fellow Ambassador Force members, and just political person extraordinaire. I don't know how else to describe you, but Brad Alexander of McGuire Woods, who's going to facilitate a conversation with two of our state's great legislative leaders, Representative Stacey Abrams and Representative Sharon. So with that.
So I'll keep the introduction short. Representative Cooper's got an appointment at the governor's office in about 30 minutes, and I know you'd like to hear from them more than me. So just by way of brief introduction, we're really lucky to have two panelists this morning who are pretty unique in the Georgia State Legislature in that they care more about getting to the right place on public policy than they do scoring political points or doing a lot of the other things that people spend time on in the building. So you're really talking this morning to two people that are from different parties, but equally concerned about trying to get us to the right place on issues. So Representative Cooper chairs the House Health Committee, and I think probably, how many years have you chaired?
12.
So over the course of that 12 years, probably more than I bet anyone in the state's history has dealt with a larger volume of every healthcare issue imaginable. That committee is really the clearinghouse for everything from scope of practice to healthcare funding to certificate of need issues to pharmaceutical regulation issues, virtually every issue that really directly impacts healthcare. That I don't know why you're so lucky, but they tend to start in the House and they tend to go through the House Health Committee. So, she's really been a strong traffic cop and has really done a good job of trying to make sure that both sides are heard and that the bills that come out of the committee are in a good spot. Professionally, has a master's degree in nursing and spent a long career doing that, both nursing and nurse education, right? Yeah. Leader Abrams leads the Democratic Party in the Georgia House. She's renowned for her ability to stay true to Democratic principles, but also find ways to work with Republicans to get stuff done that everybody can agree on, which again, as I think we've all witnessed in the presidential election, is not a trait that's omnipresent in the political process. She's a recovering tax lawyer, went to Yale Law School, and practiced that, and then has now become a serial entrepreneur and author, and is a wonderful person to work with. So thank you for both being here this morning. I guess I'll just stand. So I thought what we'd start off doing is have each of y'all just give a 3 or 4 minute update on what you see ahead for healthcare in the Georgia legislation. I know that's sort of a moving ball at this point, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of where you see major healthcare issues moving as we head into the session. We can start with either.
So I'll say what I think is true, and then she'll tell me what actually is true. So it's different of us. I think Tuesday's decision is going to change the dynamics of the conversation, but the fundamentals remain the same. We're a population of 10.5 million people. We have more than 1 million who are uninsured, and sick people get sick whether they're rich or poor. So the reality is we have a healthcare issue that we're going to have to continue to contend with. Over the last 5 to 7 years, we've dealt with it through the provider fee, which is going to come up for renewal this year. We have to deal with the issue of what is currently referred to as Medicaid expansion, but what's encompassed in that is the disproportionate share payments that have propped up our hospitals for about 40 years. Those dollars moved into Medicaid expansion, and because we did not adopt Medicaid expansion, the challenges that have faced our rural hospitals and our safety net hospitals like Grady, like Savannah Memorial, the reduction in those dollars has had an effect. That may change given the new dynamic in Washington, but the reality remains that we have to find a way to create not only solvency for, but stability for our rural hospital system. And that affects Grady in large part because especially the closer you get to Macon, if there's nowhere else to go, this is where people come. But also, we have an interlinked healthcare finance system, and so what challenges one challenges all. And so we're going to have to grapple with that and the effects to the Indigent Care Trust Fund. And then I think the third issue is going to be certificate of need, the continuing debate about whether we should have it. If we maintain it, what does it look like if we reject it? I can go into I can pontificate about how I think about it, but I will say that that is going to continue to be a conversation, and that those three things are interlinked. You cannot separate them out, although we've tried. The more acute the cost of healthcare becomes, and especially given the pressure it puts on the state of Georgia because of our very large population, but also our very high, low to moderate income population, we can't separate ourselves from this conversation, regardless of what happens in DC in terms of the financing mechanisms. Georgia's going to have to grapple with how do we adapt and adopt a formula that helps us deliver services.
Okay, I'm going to stand up because having just had knee surgery, sitting in one spot's a problem. So thank you for having this morning. Thank you for being interested in Grady. Grady holds a special place in my heart. My husband was an Emory doctor who did a good deal of his medical training here at Grady. So, Grady's important to us. It's vital to our state. So thank you for your involvement. And we have come a long way. I had a neighbor that has helped me as I've gotten through this, bringing in my paper so I wouldn't have to do 20 stairs to go out to get my paper. And something came up about Grady, and she said, "Oh, Grady, my daughter-in-law's sister, they saved her life. She had a stroke, and they recognized it down in Newton and put her on a air flight back to Grady, and now she's doing fine." And I said, "Yeah, that's Grady and the Marcus, Stroke Center, so it's great." So I could be an ambassador because I have I talk about Grady everywhere, and I told everybody, if I have a stroke, take me to Grady, because I'm getting in that age where I could have a stroke. So hopefully not. Okay, I'm a Republican. I'm shocked, I think, as much as probably the Democrats in this room and in the legislature are over the election. Who would have thunk it? And the way it went. I do have very good hopes. I have not been a fan of Obamacare totally. We needed changes, many of the changes, but I felt like it also gave us many problems. So I will tell you that I think that there will be big changes, and so I would say to you, I have no idea what's going to happen now. I think any kind of expansion is on hold, because if they're going to change it in Washington, why would we go through and make changes if they're going to make huge changes in Washington? So I think the thing is we would be very careful and just stand back and see what we could do. I think we're in good stance because we have a congressman that knows as much about medicine as anybody in the House in Washington. That is Tom Price. He's an orthopedic surgeon. He had a health plan already. The Democrats said we never had a plan. Yeah, they have plans that have done it. They have plans already ready to go. I think it'll be a melting of those plans. They did have a plan all during the debate. The press just didn't want to hear it. I don't know what's going to happen. So I think probably until they do something, we will continue to patchwork our problems with health care in this state. We are a very rural state. We forget that in the metro area because we have more doctors, we have more access to hospitals, but when you go out just outside our perimeter, we are a very, very rural state. And we have the same problem that states all over the country are having. People are moving to the metro areas, and it is leaving the sicker, older people out in the rural areas. And they are sicker, tend to be an older population, and they have less access to health care. We are looking, and we've had study groups on how we can help our rural hospitals. Money is not always the thing. You just can't pour money if the hospital doesn't have enough people to keep it floating. We have a little hospital up in the mountains that they just keep running it, and they sold off the OB and they've gotten rid of this. And it's a hospital that was built to have 160 admissions. They run 20 to 30 patients a day. You cannot keep the doors open in a hospital with 20 to 30 patients a day and have a whole hospital staff that is, doing the range of services. What we're looking at is maybe part of centers, where we have a hospital and then it has spokes where it works with smaller rural hospitals that maybe have adapted their services. So that's one of the things. I think a little patchwork. We're looking at things, we're trying to come up with new ideas of how to deliver healthcare. And they're doing this all over the country, where we're having ambulance services, where they're equipping ambulances with more technology and connecting them to the Grady Stroke Center. If they think that they're picking up a person that's had a stroke, and they can talk directly to Grady, they can send them, almost send them scans, but get them to the hospital, to the place where they need time to see where they need to go. But also, they're talking about putting nurse practitioners in the ambulances. So when they go out, and especially in rural areas, and people that are frequent flyers, that call the ambulance service many times, that they can, somebody that is qualified in healthcare as a second tier, they're not physicians, but they're certainly very advantageous to the team. They can assess them. They can tell whether they just need to be instructed on their medicines, or if they need to go to the doctor's office, or if they need to go to the hospital. So we're looking at things like that. We have started free clinics all over the state. We are using the the federally funded rural health centers. I don't know what the answers are. But we keep trying to find it. And we are open to listen to anybody that has a good idea about what we can do. So if you've got good ideas, my door is always welcome. It's on the 4th floor of the Capitol. Come see me, because as a nurse, I would, in a perfect world, every Georgian would have access to quality health care. It's not a perfect world, but I've spent my life in healthcare, so did my husband, and I would like for us to be able to reach and to deliver that. And of course, then we have a terrible doctor shortage outside the rural areas too, so it's a real problem.
Thank you. I wanted to take a second to recognize Representative Mosby. I'm used to a different badge on you, but
Where is he? And on the health committee.
Yeah. Thank you. So we'll start. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then we'll have some questions from the group here. But we'll start with Leader Abrams on this one, and then Representative Cooper, if you'd like to respond as well. I think regardless of sort of which party was in power, probably more so in the Trump administration, the trend will likely be more flexibility from CMS on how states design Medicaid programs. As we look at potentially Medicaid expansion and Medicaid reform in Georgia down the road, what does a Georgia Medicaid program ideally look like?
I think the work that was done by the Georgia Chamber is actually the right path. I think it is disingenuous to assume that as long as the congressional makeup is as it is, regardless of the administration, you were never going to have the California model. That wasn't going to happen in Georgia, and I don't think it's necessary. I do think we have a financing system that is not sustainable under the current composition of our state. We have too many poor people, we have a very rural population, and we have a healthcare financing system that cannot be competitive because it is designed not to be competitive. When you have government-based healthcare delivery, you inherently do not have real competition, and we're not going to upend all of that. So that said, the challenge is how do you structure a financing system that recognizes the historical legacy of what we have, but is a bit predictive of what needs to be. So that's a very long way of saying, I think that the closest we're going to come to some version of broader healthcare access and broader healthcare coverage is the version that has been promoted as the Georgia way. I think the question becomes, do we acknowledge that Georgia already has the most restrictive coverage in the nation? You probably already know this, but you have to make less than $7,600. You cannot be a childless adult. You have to have at least 2 adults with a dependent or 1 adult with 2 dependents in order to qualify for Medicaid. That leaves out a large portion of our population. The three models have been presented, and we'll, I'm sure Jason will go into more detail. We have to have a model that is more expansive because we just have a different composition of our state, and we're going to pay for it one way or the other. Our uncompensated care numbers are astronomical. Our coverage rates are not quite abysmal, but hovering a little bit above that. And as Chairman Cooper pointed out, we have a massive rural population that cannot get access except through these frequent flyer miles to the hospitals. And so we have to think about a different model. But the only way you can get to that different model is by acknowledging you have to pay the doctors they're going to see. And the only way to do that is through Medicaid or some version thereof. And so I do think we will come to some conclusion on that. I do think it will be more flexible. It will probably include the conversation about block grants. But I would caution everyone to remember that what happened on Tuesday not only changed the administration and the White House, it also changed the composition of the Senate. The Senate is now 51-49. And so unless and you've got a group of folks who are up for re-election in 2018, so there are still going to be checks and balances on the conversation, and you have a lot of states that have already adapted and adopted the Medicaid expansion model that was in place from CMS before, and they don't want to go home and tell 10 to 15 million of their constituents, oops, never mind. We are very, very shy about telling people they can't have stuff we gave them. So.
It's a way to get non-elected. And I think that is going to be a problem for DC because in any new model, they are going to have to find a way to phase out maybe what they gave these states that adapted it or change it without cutting off coverage to the people who took it. For the states that didn't, I think block grants, we will certainly see more block grants where they give us the money and tell us to design the programs. States have cried out for that a lot, saying, we can do a better job of designing what we need for Georgia than they can do in DC. And I will say, when we, did some other things, they used a Wisconsin model and so forth for other big changes. We are very restrictive. Now, you have chamber members here, and I'm all for the chamber, but when they sent us the models, they didn't put a price tag on those models. And hey guys, chamber members, could you go back and put a price tag on what you sent us? We're a very conservative state, and our coverage is very restrictive, and our governors tend to look very carefully at the budget. I think Medicaid now is around 17% of the budget, I think, and it is our one place where it always grows, and we have trouble with, the fact that it has cost overruns, and so the administration, the leadership have been very reluctant to expand it because they're not sure how they control the cost. And if it had expanded, I think they put the estimates that it would then be over 20% of their budget, and when you put education with that, college and K through 1, it would be 80% of the state budget. That would leave nothing for our, infrastructure, or taking care of police and all that other kind of things. Because that's why you've seen the reluctance. I don't know what's going to happen, Stacey. We'll be in the mix of it and trying to make sure that at least the people that have coverage now don't lose it, it's not taken away, or any way, change where it would hurt them. And trying to find a way that we can cover more Georgians. I don't know the answer.
Madam Chair, I'll start with you if it's okay with this next question, because I know you've literally written a book about it, but we've got a lot of folks in here that have a lot of relationships and a lot of knowledge about health policy, but maybe not a lot of experience working with government and around the public policy process. What advice can y'all give us about how to effectively engage with government on health care issues?
Well, certainly knowing your representative and your senator, regardless of which party they belong to, healthcare basically is not one party or the other. It's about people. Now, did we fight over Obamacare? Yeah, and but it had good things, it had bad things, and I will tell you, I used to represent Newt Gingrich, And I gave him hell that when they were in power, they didn't do something in those years about what we needed and changes in healthcare. And Newt will tell you, I don't mind speaking my mind. So, you know, people tend to think that their congressmen are the most important people in the world. And of course, right now, Tom Price would be very important with the budget and talking about healthcare in Washington when it comes to that. But on a day-to-day basis in State House, we make a lot of decisions about healthcare that affect your life and everything it does, more so than people in Washington. So get to know your congressman and your own senator. You know, out of session, call them up, take them out for a cup of coffee or breakfast, and say, I'd like to get to know you. I'd like to just tell you, this is my area of expertise. If I can ever be of service to you, please call on me. When we get down in session, it's crazy. Come on down to the Capitol and see. My aide is here, and John is 6'7". And it is so busy in the halls of the Capitol. Sometimes John has literally said, get behind me, Representative Cooper. And I have gone behind him, held his coattail, and we have, gone through the crowds to get me to the floor of the House or to a meeting. It's that bad sometimes. So it's always better to talk to us before session about your concerns, about a bill, when we have time to sit down and really think about it. So we'll be in here for the 40-day session with probably 200 or 300 bills that are moving, and it's really hard. So that's what I would say about doing that.
So having been one myself, I tend to liken working with politicians like dealing with a 15-year-old girl. We respond to money, peer pressure, and attention. Those are the three things. And if you want to get a politician to do anything at all, those are the three issues. Money, and it's contributions on one end, but it's also the conversation about how much things cost. Making sure we understand the money side of something is a critical pressure point. Peer pressure. Don't just talk to one person. Basically play us off of each other. Make sure we have to deal with one another on an issue. Build a popular culture around a conversation. And that can be a handful of folks. It can be the Ambassador Force. If all of you are calling us, we're going to know that this group knows we exist. One of the best ways to preserve and this goes to the third one, attention. One of the best ways to preserve your job in politics, and I say this with a great deal of respect to my colleague and myself, and for Representative Mosby, is that if people don't know who you are, they usually won't vote you out of office. Mediocrity is a great way to keep your job. If people aren't happy or mad, they assume you're not doing something terrible. I mean, we also all have people like that we work with. If you're like, why are they still here? They never soared, but they never fell. And so I say that because when it comes to attention, the more you pay attention to who we are and what we do, the more responsive we are to you. We get away with things because no one knows we did it until after the fact. When we come post-session to deliver the autopsy. And what has to happen instead is a conversation with us, as Representative Stewart pointed out, having the conversation with us about the issues in the time. So either before session starts, but also when session is happening, until that gavel is banged by the speaker and the lieutenant governor, nothing is final. And we will be responsive if we know you pay attention. So as we're having conversations about medical issues, when we're talking about healthcare policy, when we're talking about spending, when we're making those budget choices, if we don't hear from you, we take that as a tacit acceptance that you like what we're doing. And so money, peer pressure, and attention are the ways to make us behave and deliver the best policy possible.
Absolutely.
I mean, Grady has great legislative lobbyists, and lobbyists are not bad and nasty, and none of them are crooks with the money. But let me tell you, if, Doctor, you call me and you walk over to the Capitol to talk to me, it means more than any of these lobbyists. You know your subject. I mean, because you're the one that's treating people coming into the emergency room there. So that means so much more, and it might be able to explain the issue better to me, because I'm not a physician and working in the emergency room. So, the personal contact from you then just reinforces what your lobbyists do. But you've got a good gang of lobbyists, and sometimes that may be all you can do, is say to the lobbyist, look, this is a big issue, get down there and just ring our doors, and let me tell you, they do. For Grady, they do.
Okay, thank you. So I thought we'd ask for some questions from the group. We've got about 10 more minutes here, so I'm sure you guys have some. Yeah?
So good morning, my name is Erica Allen, and I thank you both for being here. In addition to serving on the Ambassador Task Force, I also serve on the board of the American Diabetes Association. So this is a very laser-focused question. I'm excited that our state is one of the few states that has the Safe in School Act that allows students who are managing diabetes type 1 or 2 to have certain parameters set around that, right, while they're in school, to help them manage to that while they're in school. But since my focus on the board is advocacy, I also know that that isn't always implemented in terms of things like having 2 trained individuals, but then that's when they don't have to be nurses. Again, the parameters of being able to get to the office or to a safe place to test their blood, that type of thing. So in terms of enforcement, particularly if the act is already in play, what are things that we can do to help ensure that those things are being followed?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we have a problem. Many of the bills, the legislature doesn't have an enforcement on it. We just don't. We pass legislation of all kinds. I mean, I got really mad one time when I, updated the stalking bill, and I heard that a judge in a small town was not enforcing the new law, and I just had a fit about it. Why not? And what are we going to do about it to make that judge? And I got informed by the league, we didn't have any way to make them, and unless they want to, follow the law, they want to know about it. We don't even have a way to get you to know to get people to know what the new laws are. If the bar doesn't tell them, and they don't pay attention, or the judges association, we don't have a way of knowing it. So we have no enforcement. But what I'm hearing now, and the kind of bill that comes to my committee, I'm hearing that they are letting untrained people do trach care on some of the kids in school. Our schools are now becoming and having where the nurse or whatever that don't have to take care of kids that have real serious health problems. And that we have people that are giving injections and things that should. That'll be a topic this session, and I will remember your comments about what we're doing, because we do have these kids in school and it's a problem, and school systems are not instituting it. And here again, this is a place to go to your school board meetings, because we believe in local control until we have to step in. And so the money, like for school nurses, is given, to the local people. And what I'm hearing is we have local school boards that instead of using that money to pay a school nurse, an LPN or an RN, they're using it for other things and having untrained people with it.
You have time for one more. Yeah.
To either or both of you, what did we learn as far as any change in attitude of our taxpayers towards providing resources to under-resourced people from the outcome of the voting on these amendments? Education, transportation, do you think that there's a change that could spill over into healthcare?
I will say this, I think that, well, I know, I spent a lot of time going around the state this year, and the most effective conversations we had were around the conversation of Medicaid expansion and the opportunity school district. So Amendment 1 and then healthcare. And everyone wants more, they want better, they want quality, they don't know how it gets paid for, and there is often a disconnect between what we desire as a society and what we're willing to pay for. And so it's bridging that disconnect. And I think what you saw on Tuesday was a reflection that we have 3 groups of people. We have people who agree, people who disagree, people who don't know that they should care. Because that third group, if you look at the national results, 25.6% voted for Democrat, 25.5% voted for Republican, 46.7% didn't vote, and 1.7% thought that Gary Johnson was, yeah. We'll have our therapy session about that later. But what I think that says is that we have to do a better job of connecting the dots. We spend a lot of time having macro conversations that have micro implications. And until we do a better job of connecting those two pieces, both as legislators but also as active citizens, we can't extrapolate much because half of the people who should have been impacted didn't raise their voices. We cannot assume that that's apathy. For a population, it's apathy. For another population, it's ignorance. It is the fact that they didn't have enough information or they weren't part of whatever population was being spoken to. And that's why I always go back to just how high the level. Georgia has a 17% poverty rate. That's a lot of people who spend most of their time trying to figure out how to survive. They are not paying attention to politics. And they don't all live in Southwest Georgia. They live in the North Georgia mountains. They live in Metro Atlanta. They live down in Southwest Georgia and Southeast Georgia. And so we have to take from the results of the election a responsibility to do a better job and a consistent job of conversation. That's the most transformative way to get people to engage is for people to understand, and they understand best if we talk to them about it. That's expensive, it's time intensive, and it's hard because you have to talk to people you don't necessarily like about things you don't really want to talk about, and they're not going to agree with you. And being in a profession where people liking me is important, it's hard. But I think we have to take from those decisions that we do believe in local control, we do believe in investment, and we just have to make sure people understand how those two pieces fit together.
And I think we're a very conservative state. I mean, it's one of the reasons that we came through the recession as one of about 8 states that had still maintained a AAA bond rating. Now, how's that important? I mean, we have bonds to build schools, college campuses and things, and whatever rate we pay comes out of the state budget. So if our bond rating goes down and we get charged more interest, we have less money to put toward, healthcare and so forth. So it's very important. But we are very conservative, and that has not changed as Republicans. It was the Democrat tradition for years and years and years to be very conservative. It's not something that the Republicans have done. But we do have people who are anti-tax people, and in healthcare sometimes, especially if you have it and you're healthy and you're middle class or whatever, and you're a legislator and you don't have anybody sick in your family, and it's just not on your radar when there's 10 other people asking you for money down in the legislature and wanting it to go here or there. And if you're interested in the prisons, prison reform, or you want it there, so you get pulled. And sometimes I've often said, because I can stay in this meeting and rest, I have often said, and I don't really want this to happen, but in a perfect world sometimes, some of our legislators would have something happen where they needed somebody in their family to really need health care, to be really impacted on what the cost is and what it does, and then they would have a different perspective of it. Now, I really don't want bad things to happen to anybody. God forbid something happens on but sometimes it just is not on people's radar screen, and it's really hard, like Stacey, even on our level who we serve, it's hard to get through to them because legislators have other areas that they're much more, healthcare has been my life's work. My husband's, I live and breathe healthcare and what's best for patients. But I'm a rarity. And in the Georgia House, we have one PA, I'm a nurse, we've had one doctor, we've got another doctor now. That's 4. We have some pharmacists, but I don't count them as dentists. They don't really do hands-on patient care.
Careful.
And a really nice pharmacist got me here to this meeting today, so I really appreciate the pharmacist. And over in the Senate, there are 2 doctors, 1 nurse, and 1 PA. I think that's it. And so there's only about 8 of us out of a total of 236 that have basically spent our careers in healthcare. That means there are a whole lot more that are lawyers and grocers and Indian chiefs that are not, where healthcare is not their priority. And so, it's an uphill battle sometimes getting, people to really listen to what our needs are.
I would add one piece to what Sharon said. When she said you're conservative, I saw a few people flinch. And here's what I think she means. We're a small, no, but I think it's important, I think you make an important point. We're a small C conservative state. Regardless of the party in power, we tend to be frugal in our spending, and we do not approach change lightly. So small C conservative, not the big C political conservative.
Right.
And I think that's a truism that will also govern how we make choices heading into this legislative session. And I think the reason that Sharon and I have been able to work together so well is that both of us approach the conversations that we have with that small C mentality, which is that change the things that need to be changed, preserve the things that need to be preserved, but make changes when changes are necessary. And it's one of the reasons her committee has such volume, because Chairman Cooper is very thoughtful about what is allowed to move and what is not allowed to move. We don't wildly, just because a good idea shows up does not mean it's going to be adopted, because we have to understand whether it's necessary. And so, sort of to wrap all of this together, as we think about healthcare policy, I think we have to pay attention to the national zeitgeist, but we have to remember that this is a local conversation. This is a local set of issues, and when I say local, I mean local to Georgia. But that means that everyone in this room has to make sure that you're not only talking to your friends who live in the metro Atlanta area, but anyone you know who lives outside of Atlanta. Those conversations and the power that you bring, you're all here not because you're all pretty, because you're all very nice looking, but you all have some form of community power. That community power has to be harnessed, because we are going to make some very difficult decisions about who we want to be as a state when it comes to healthcare. And there's going to be a pressure from those who feel that this week was a referendum on ending healthcare access. That cannot be the lesson we take away. But it will be the lesson if people remain silent, assuming that the national conversation is Georgia's conversation. We think coverage is important. What we haven't decided is how expansive it should be. And I think the role and responsibility that this ambassador force can play with your tremendous lobbyists, with those who, I mean, my first year in the legislature, this guy named Pete Carell decided we should fix Grady. And we did.
We did.
And
Thanks, Mr. Carell.
that happened with Democratic and Republican working together. That could not have happened from one party or the other. Because what we forget is that partisanship is the beginning of the conversation. We hate each other for a lot of other reasons within our own parties. And so you create these really interesting relationships that cut across partisanship, because it's about peopleship and it's about the underlying questions we're trying to address. So I would urge everyone not to become despondent or overly enthusiastic about what the results were on Tuesday, because what has to happen in Georgia has to think about Georgia first. And we are willing to do things. We are going to be slow and plodding at times. We like to call it methodical. But it will happen, but this group has to be the ones pushing us to make those choices, because healthcare access is critical to our survival.
Thanks for the word frugal. I'll use that instead of the big C. Sorry, conservative to speak. I'm such a, you know, mentor, but thanks, Stacey, for that. And she's hit on the head. So, and you may not see, like I say, we're slow and methodical. So, it may not be the first session, but we'll keep working on it. And if you can't tell, the two of us are extremely committed. I will fight you to the tooth over health care for patients. I don't always win, but I'll be back. So far, people in my district keep, sending me back. And as long as they hear, as long as the speaker, I serve with the pleasure of the speaker, as long as he lets me chair out there, I'll be in there fighting. And Grady, I'll fight for Grady as hard as I'll fight for anything else. Because like I said, it is absolutely essential to our survival and healthcare survival in this state. We train our doctors that go out across our state, what few we have, and you are vital to this state. The burn unit, and the Center for Brain Trauma, you're vital. This hospital is vital. So know that two of us are going to fight.
Thank you. Representative Cooper, I know we promised you that we get you to the governor's office in time for your meeting. Leader, do you have enough time for one or two more questions?
Thanks.
Mr. Crowell?
I would just urge you both to remember what you said. There's a whole bunch of opportunities to help safety net hospitals like Grady outside of the big healthcare issue. We give our state's one of the few that if you provide 1% uncompensated care, the state gives you money. We give money to Piedmont, we give money to St. Joe. That is stupid. We've got to raise the hurdle rate so that the memorials and the, whatever the hell it's called in Augusta now, Regents or whatever it is, and the Grady's, they are supported by the state in a caring way while we go through this crazy period, and we're going through it. You and I have never seen a plan proposed by anybody that said if we throw Obamacare out, here's what we ought to do exactly, and here's how much it will cost us exactly.
Mr. Corral, I've never, taken.
I'm not Mr. Corral, I'm old, but I'm not that old.
It's hard for me to say, okay, Pete. Yeah, I was in there when we were saving Grady and making the changes.
I know you were.
And before that happened, I went to the CEO of Wellstar, which is a public hospital, and I said, we're in trouble. Grady needs $6 million. We've got all these big hospital systems. Why don't y'all get together? You put all these billboards up. Why don't you find a way to donate $1 million each to Grady? Help us get through this till we get it solved. And he later told me that he tried to get the CEOs of the big hospitals, and nobody, they wouldn't work together. I am telling you, we fight the hospitals like mad. They don't care. And when they do things, at one point they hired 86 lobbyists to fight minor changes to CON. Sometimes I'm so angry at the hospitals because they are so selfish in how they're not willing to admit that Grady might need an extra hand. So if you can find a way to knock them in the head, we can find a way to knock them in the head.
I think we're probably at a wrap, so thanks again, I appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you again to Leader Abrams and Chairwoman Cooper. You can tell we've got some great champions and ambassadors in the Georgia legislature through them. They've never hesitated to go to bat for us when Grady and our patients really need it. So what we're going to move on to, I've got a couple more questions for you to make sure you're awake. And pull out your phone. And this first question, and these questions were made before Tuesday, is do you think the healthcare issues facing this country will get better, get worse, or be about the same in the next 4 years under the new president? I'm going to move on to the next question. Yep. So it looks like, and things may have to get worse before they get better. Let's move on to the next question. Let's go back to the elder question. No, just kidding. Do you think Georgia can be a leader among states in healthcare reform? That's going to be the next question. Can Georgia do things to be a leader in healthcare reform?
Can or will? Yeah.
That's a good question. We said can. Can we? Okay, so leaning towards yes. And what I'll do is introduce the next speaker off of this question, actually, about can we be a leader? One organization statewide that has stepped up to tackle the questions of healthcare reform is the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. And Grady's been participating with the Chamber over the past several months as they've worked through policy options on how to address the healthcare access issue in the state and healthcare costs. And Jason O'Rourke has agreed to present today. Glad you didn't have jury duty this morning. He got out of that from yesterday, but I've been working with him for probably 10 years now. And he's really been one of those those policy wonks behind the scenes that's working to tackle big issues. We first started working together tackling the transportation funding issue back about a decade ago, and then he's moved on to work on political campaigns. He's worked in Washington D.C. and he's been working for the chamber on big issues like healthcare and education. And Jason, thank you for that.
Well, thank you for having me this morning. I sent Matt my final presentation on Monday afternoon, and yesterday I said, I think I might have to rejigger this a little bit at some point, but Representative Abrams put it very well, that while the political ground may have shifted, the fundamentals have not changed. So I think that's sort of where I'm going to approach it from, and that what we're going to talk about today was true on Monday, and it's still true today. So we'll work through that, and I'll sort of go through. I'm going to attempt, I know this group is much more educated about healthcare issues than the average citizen, but as I've also spoken to state legislators and other policymakers, there is a lot within this discussion that is not quite understood and maybe not put into terms that are that make sense for an average business person who cares about healthcare. So I'm going to attempt to give you the last decade of health policy discussions in about 15 minutes. So I'm going to go through some slides. I've tried to present this in a way that makes it somewhat easy to understand. But if I go too fast, just tell me to stop if you need to look at the graph or anything. So what I want to start from is, why does the Georgia Chamber care about Medicaid expansion and healthcare access? That's one of the questions we usually get from policymakers. Two reasons that I would say, outside of whether or not this is just the right thing to do, the two things that we've been focusing on come from an economic development perspective. So there was some discussion about the rural healthcare network right now. There are 60 counties in Georgia that are projected to lose population over the next 15 years. The metro areas are growing, the rural areas are declining. Those areas don't have babies being born, they don't have jobs, they don't have job growth. In many cases, their hospitals are going away. If you're an employer in another part of the country and you're looking to locate in Georgia, and you're picking between two locations, they have similar tax bases, similar property values, similar workforce issues. One of them has a healthy, thriving hospital. The other has a hospital that went out of business. You are going to choose the community that has the hospital. So for many parts of this state, it is an economic development issue. If you do not have a functioning healthcare delivery system in your community, you are not a prospect for economic development. You have no realistic opportunities in the next 15 years to recruit any employers to move to your community. So for the rural parts of the state, that's a big issue. The other piece of it is that from an employer perspective or from an employee perspective, we are already paying the costs of uncompensated care. So when someone comes to Grady or another hospital like Grady, doesn't have insurance, doesn't have any kind of coverage, and the hospital basically covers them for it, inevitably that cost has to be passed back down, through an indirect method or a direct method. So if you have private insurance, you are going to wait in line with all those other individuals who don't have insurance. It takes longer for you to get service, it takes longer for you to get your health care. The other piece is that it goes all the way through the commercial market. What is one major reason why premiums are increasing year over year? It's because those uncompensated costs are being spread among the consumers who can pay. They're paid for by employers, they're paid for by employees. So from the perspective of the chamber and from the business community, we're going to pay for this access of uncompensated care one way or the other. Our choice is, which way do we do it in the most efficient and the most effective way? As we've studied it over the last year, the consensus has been that the Medicaid program is a more efficient, more effective, and less expensive way to pay for this, so we can have lower premiums for employees, lower employer share, and also just a better healthcare delivery system. So that's sort of the starting point where I want to begin the discussion. What I'm going to do now is sort of talk through a little bit about why that uncompensated care piece exists, and try to shed some light on what we call the coverage gap. The coverage gap is a term that gets thrown around a lot. I'm not sure that it's ever been really well articulated as to what that is. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief history here. So major components of the Affordable Care Act, federal health insurance regulation, small group exchanges, those are the marketplaces where people can buy insurance that don't get it through their employer, Medicaid expansion, that was to increase the number of the population that qualifies for Medicaid, and then a whole host of other issues in about a 1,000-page bill. So why is Medicaid expansion the contentious, controversial, unsolved piece of this? So NFIB versus Sebelius was the large, Obamacare court ruling that took place in 2012. The Obamacare was upheld on the individual mandate portion, which was one major piece of the federal law. But Medicaid expansion as a mandate was ruled to be unconstitutional. So what the law was designed to require coverage and also to make states expand Medicaid to a certain level. Half of that stayed, half of it went out. So you have this giant federal law with a huge piece of it that was ruled unconstitutional. Obviously, you have a gap in its effectiveness. So the coverage gap is on this slide here. And what a lot of people don't understand when we talk to them is that just because you are under the poverty level, so what we would say 100% federal poverty level, if you're below that, we consider people to be living in poverty. Just because you are living in poverty does not mean that you qualify for Medicaid, which is something that is foreign to a lot of policymakers. So as you see on the slide here, on the left chart, the coverage gap is the area between traditional Medicaid and 100% FPL. Sorry, back. So traditional Medicaid it covers a certain segment of the population. At 100% FPL, the marketplace subsidies kick in. So anyone who makes above 100% is allowed to buy healthcare on the exchange with a subsidy. But anyone who is below that, it was assumed under the law they would be getting Medicaid. When Medicaid expansion was deemed not mandatory, that population was left without an option. The bar on the right side, the new adult group, is the population that we're talking about covering under a Medicaid expansion program. So that's the group that's between what was already getting Medicaid and where those marketplace subsidies really kick in. You see on the far side what the federal poverty guidelines look like. This is another thing, say 100 FPL, 138 FPL. Those are kind of these arbitrary distinctions. In real dollar value, you see what that looks like. So two-person household, $16,000 a year. That's what 100% FPL looks like. Not a stretch to say if you're a two-person household with $16,000 a year in income, your healthcare costs are a huge portion of what your overall take-home pay would be. National view, overall, what's going on around the country. You can see here the gold and sort of darker states. I think my colors got switched a little bit here, but the gold and darker states, those are the ones that are traditional Medicaid expansion, alternative expansion. The red states are the ones where it's under discussion. The darker gray are the ones where states are making proposals, and then the lightest colored states are the ones that have not chosen to expand Medicaid at this time. So you see, Georgia is one of 7 states left that has not even presented a plan or developed any kind of waiver to the federal government. So the majority of the country has already moved forward in closing that gap between the traditional Medicaid patients and those who get the subsidies on the exchange. This is a map that just shows the uninsured population under 138% by county. There's probably a couple of counties on there that are shocking to a lot of people. Gwinnett, Forsyth, Cobb, places that we traditionally think of as being wealthy communities, have more than 40% of their population that is under 138 FPL. So in most cases, these are stratified communities with lots of wealth on one end and lots of people living in poverty on the other end. That whole the discussion around suburban poverty, very real, very relevant to this conversation. So this portion I'd like to move into to sort of give you a little bit of a personal, individual touch to what the coverage gap looks like. And I present it this way as who are the people in the coverage gap. They're probably not who you think. Y'all actually might be a little bit ahead of the average person on this, but most people don't understand what the type of person looks like who is in this gap. So this is the profile of an individual in the coverage gap. And I use these examples with real jobs that are from average salaries from, what it would look like. So you're a hotel bellhop making $10 an hour, working 25 hours a week, annual income is $13,000 a year. You're at 118 FPL. This person is currently ineligible for Medicaid because they are a childless adult. They are effectively unable to buy subsidized coverage on the exchange because their income is so low, they can't actually buy insurance even with those subsidies. So let's say that this person works, promoted to assistant manager, they get a raise, they work more hours, their annual income goes up to $21,800. They're now at 185 FPL. They now qualify for generous subsidies on the federal exchange, and they are effectively able to purchase health care coverage. This is someone that before was having a hard time, they've got a raise, they're actually, even though they're making more money now, they actually get better subsidies and they're more able to buy health care on the exchange. So I'll move family of 3 in the coverage gap. So these are 2 adults working. We're going to call them a cook and a maid. Combined making $15 an hour. They have 1 child. They each work 40 hours a week. Annual income is at $31,980. That puts them at 160 FPL. Under the law, their employer should be required to give them health insurance. In many cases, employers just pay the penalty. So this person still doesn't have health insurance. They are currently receiving generous subsidies on the federal exchange, which allows them to buy coverage. So let's say that for some reason both adults see their hours cut for whatever reason. They still make a combined $15 an hour. They each work 29 hours a week. Their annual income has dropped to $22,000. They're now at 110% FPL. They are still eligible for subsidies on the exchange, but this family cannot effectively purchase coverage for their family. And they are now also ineligible for Medicaid because they still make too much money. So let's move to a profile of a family of 5 in the coverage gap. So this is a family where there's one parent working, the other parent stays home. They have 1 infant and 2 children, say between 5 and 10. The dad works in a warehouse, makes $9.60 an hour, works 25 hours a week. Annual income is at $12,500. They're at 44% federal poverty level. The children are eligible for Medicaid. The mother is eligible for Medicaid while she has an infant child, and the father is ineligible for Medicaid. So you can see how that would be confusing. Let's say that the dad is promoted to a manager because he worked hard, moves to the front office, gets a raise to $13.50 an hour, works 40 hours a week. Their family annual income goes up to $28,000. They're now at 99% FPL. The family gets no subsidies on the exchange. The father gets no Medicaid. The mother gets Medicaid while she is nursing with an infant child. The kids under 5 get Medicaid. The kids 6 to 19 get no Medicaid. The point being, this is a totally arbitrary series of cutoff points that make it very difficult for a family of 5 anywhere in this coverage gap range to have an effective and common sense healthcare delivery system for their children. This is so complicated, and they will have so many different ways that they will be going to visit healthcare providers that it just boggles the mind that we created this system. So this is the one that I think really, to me, sells the point of the fundamentals haven't changed. Regardless of what happens with Congress, this family of 5 is still partially caught in the coverage gap and partially covered by effective government programs. And if we're going to be honest about, do we think that this family of 5 would be better off with health care access, then we need to have a real conversation around Medicaid expansion. So this is where I have to go back and change what I was going to talk about before. We were moving towards, in this country, a position where it was highly likely the Affordable Care Act was going to stay, and it was going to basically become the law of the land going forward. That is probably going to change. I'll say this without getting too in the weeds on the way Congress works. It is actually kind of easy to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Replace is harder, and that just goes through a bunch of wonky Senate budget reconciliation processes. But we can repeal it. The Republicans could repeal it within the first week of Congress, but replacing it is a lot harder. Aside from the fact that there are a lot of popular components, pre-existing conditions, insurance till parents till 26, Medicaid expansion in 32 states, there are a lot of popular pieces that have helped to drive costs down in the states where they've been in effect. So whatever we do is still going to have some level of those components. I think that Representative Cooper was correct, and we're more likely to see something like a block grant going forward. So a lot of the stuff that's within our report was designed for a big C conservative state. We looked around and said, okay, what are the other states like Utah, Indiana, Ohio, other states with Republican governors, what have they done? And we modeled our program after what was effective in those states and tried to stay away from things that weren't effective. So the plan we put forward gives three options. It's through a variety of choices of through traditional Medicaid expansion, through expansion under a waiver, and then combining some components of commercial insurance with the traditional Medicaid program. The goal being, how do we help people move out of the Medicaid program and get them used to commercial insurance? Things like co-pays, things like health savings accounts, the consumer and market, the combination of consumer and market-driven approaches that get people used to commercial insurance, what it means to be a savvy healthcare consumer. That's the goal of our policy proposals. At the end of the day, whatever happens at the congressional level, we still have somewhere between 600,000 and 1 million people in Georgia who do not have health insurance coverage. So we're looking at 10% of the population of the state. If we're going to treat healthcare like a right and pretend it's a commodity, we're always going to have these problems. We have laws in this country that require us to provide basic services to people when they come to the hospital. And then we pretend like healthcare is a commodity just like buying a television or a lawnmower. That's why we have these fundamental flaws in the way healthcare is priced and the way healthcare is delivered. And we need to have an honest conversation around, all right, if it's going to be a right, then we're going to treat it like a right, and we're going to actually price it like a right. And we're going to make sure that our reimbursement rates and the money side of things fits in with the way we actually deliver the process. So that's like I said, 30 years of healthcare in 15 minutes. Happy to answer any questions if anybody's got anything. We can go back to other slides too. Yeah.
So what role does the CHIP program play in all of this?
So CHIP is Medicaid for children. So CHIP it's part of the federal program. Essentially, the federal government recognizes that it is much more effective to give children Medicaid even if the parents don't qualify for it. So our program doesn't actually change the CHIP piece of it. The CHIP piece would stay as is. Ours is more focused on getting coverage to those childless adults. So childless adults who are working, who just do not have access to healthcare any other way. And then also to parents of some other children that are in an income gap. So it fits in the sense that the existing CHIP program, along with an expansion of access to the parents, makes for a better healthcare delivery system when everyone in the family is covered in the same program. But it won't expand or reduce the CHIP program as is.
Just for those who don't know, CHIP is the Children's Health Insurance Program that was enacted during the Clinton administration.
So Representative Cooper said that she wanted you to present this with a price tag.
Yeah.
But I'm confused in that I thought we're leaving a lot of federal Medicaid expansion money on the table.
Sure.
That would pay for this at least for some period of time.
Yeah, so I'll go into that a little bit. The way that when the Affordable Care Act was first implemented, there was the requirement of states to expand Medicaid. Originally, the federal government was going to pay for the full expansion. It drops back to a 95% federal match to a 5% state match. And then over time, it works its way down to 90% federal, 10% state. So eventually, all states are going to be paying, all states who expanded, we're going to be paying a 10% of the share. So for every new person who has stayed enrolled in Medicaid that was in the coverage gap, the state would pay 10% and the feds would pay 90%. Now, that's a great question that really leads into why is this another good reason? Why is there also good evidence to expand? Right now, Georgia taxpayers are sending tax dollars to Washington for other states to expand Medicaid, and we're one of a handful of states who are not receiving that back. So, you know, regardless of whether or not we expand, we're going to continue to send those dollars to Washington. So there is a very strong argument that these are Georgia tax dollars that we're sending, and it would be nice if we could have them back to cover our population. But there is a state cost to that, so that whether it's the 5% or the 10%, there is a state share. And so our plan does have, we're in the process of validating what that cost would be. That's the second piece of our study, was one, to talk about the policy options, and two, to really go into the details of the full financials, including the economic impact. So without going into too many details, it is not an insurmountable budget item for us to fund as a state. Again, the state funds things that are a priority to the state. So it could be, whether it's $10 million or $100 million of a state share, whatever it is, we're currently sending that money to Washington and not getting it back. And if we move forward with some type of expansion, whether it's a block grant or whatever it looks like, the goal would be to draw down those federal funds in some way. So she's correct in that there will be a price tag for the state. I will say that the amount of money that we would likely pay is so minimal compared to the amount of money that we'll draw down that it's a very good deal to work within the system to get that money back.
So that sounds to me like a matter of communication. It's political. Everything you just said means it's political.
Yeah.
And we need to repackage it, right? And communicate it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's I'll say this for, we're doing some poll testing on this, and messages that appeal to Democrats, messages that appeal to Republicans, the one that works best for both is the one I just said. We are currently sending tax dollars to Washington and not getting them back in Georgia. So if you want one takeaway, start there, because that argument works for Republicans and Democrats.
I have a question. I just moved to this state, so I'm just learning a lot about this. And I heard this morning that Obamacare was costing Georgia money, and the funding was decreasing. And I think that they were talking about, what is that, Matt? The non-compensation?
Yeah. Disproportionate share hospital program.
What do you call that?
The DISH.
The DISH. The DISH is falling, so that's acceptable, and I understand that. But because of the argument that you just made, I figured this out, reading this on my own, that we're losing more money, and the system is completely dysfunctional if you don't take the Medicaid expansion. But if you take the Medicaid expansion, while the burden does go on to the state incrementally over the years, the states go they're much better in the forward, and they win from the result of this, right?
Yeah.
So this argument that the DISH is decreasing and Obamacare is responsible for that, that's taken out of context, is it not?
No, I think that's another piece that we could spend an hour talking about the different policy levers on this. But yeah, so the other piece of Medicaid expansion. So we've had these disproportionate share payments to states for years, and they were there to sort of fill the gap for uncompensated care. The Medicaid expansion was supposed to make those DISH payments unnecessary. So that was part of the other piece of it. And when you talk about, these are all the structural flaws with the Affordable Care Act, well, they were structural flaws because half of the act was deemed unconstitutional. And so the DISH payments, Congress has continued to kick the can down the road for many years and saying, well, we haven't figured this out yet, keep paying them, but eventually we're not going to. If and when those DISH payments become a reality, the states that have expanded Medicaid will be in a position to absorb those cuts. The states that did not expand access in some way are going to be staring down a huge deficit. And it's going to fall onto the hospitals.
Right, and the people who declined the expansion are responsible for that huge deficit. And that's like when he was talking about, the other hospitals, Grady is the one safety net for Atlanta. And this hospital is impacted more by Medicaid than any other hospital in the state.
Right.
And can we say for Grady, you bring up a great point, and for Grady, that policy issue alone, Matt, I'll let you deliver the punchline. In 2017, could impact Grady by?
Up to $14 million losses, it's between 11 and $14 million loss in 2017, actually.
It ramps up from there.
To $52 million a year in loss.
Nothing's changed.
So then, we have people that are part of this process, so how can this group better inform the politicians and help you in this matter as well?
Yes, I mean, that one's, Matt does a good job doing that, but, no, I mean, I think that's the, I'm trying to think of a good analogy for it, but I mean, it's you're in a tunnel and there's a light coming, it's either the end of the tunnel or it's a train, the dish payments are the train, right? And so, I don't know that is set in yet for policymakers. I think because Congress has kicked the can down the road and extended the time frame several years, I don't know if people are taking those as seriously as they should, but that map that I put up with the states that have expanded either through traditional Medicaid or through a waiver, it's continuing to fill in more and more, and the more states that expand coverage in some way, as that map gets darker and darker, Congress is less and less likely to extend those cuts, or to kick the can more. So it's going to happen eventually. Those cuts are going to kick in at some point. And so we're going to be left without a lot of options if we continue to not accept the federal dollars.
So, but many times, so far, the federal legislature has passed emergency legislation to continue that funding.
Mm-hmm.
Is that option dead for 2017?
Yeah.
I mean, we expect that, we expect Congress will delay the cuts again.
Well, then why are we running around playing like they're not?
Well, it's.
I'm confused. I mean, haven't John Lewis and people like that always come through proposing legislation to delay the cuts?
Yeah, but it's because we asked them to and have to continue to remind them what the severe impact is if they don't do that. And that's our number one priority.
So all is not lost.
Yep.
I mean, in the short term, right, the short-term answer is that as long as Georgia is not expanding access in some way, we're still better off lobbying to keep those cuts from going into place.
Absolutely.
So there's a clear cart and horse here. From our perspective, the horse needs to be expansion, and then we can worry about then having the cuts come into effect is manageable. But if we get one in front of the other, it's going to be a serious short-term crisis for any provider.
I thought that the chairwoman said that expansion of Medicaid would double our expenses in the state from 10% of the budget currently for Medicaid to 20%. That doesn't make sense to me if it's just going to be at a maximum when it's at some point 10% of the cost of the money is coming back. I don't understand those numbers. Those numbers don't seem to work for me.
Sure.
If we're only paying at a maximum 10% of the cost of the expansion, how then can it rise double the impact on the budget in the state of Georgia?
This is a retired banker.
Yeah. No, I think without looking at exactly what the numbers look like, I think it is reasonable that we could double the Medicaid eligible population, and I think that would be, if you looked at it truly as just doubling, if you look at it as that would double the cost of the state.
But not really.
But
Well, I think it might be because if I understand it, for us to get the Medicaid expansion, Georgia gives a nickel, U.S. government gives 95 cents.
right.
And over the time period, we have to give a dime, and they will give us 90 cents. because we don't wanna spend the extra nickel, we're giving up the 90 cents.
No, I get that.
Yeah, I get what you said, right.
That's not
Because-
what she said. What she
Right.
said is the current expense is 10%. If we implement the expansion of Medicaid, it will go to 20% of our budget. That cannot be.
By spending an extra nickel, will that double
That's
what
what,
the state
it
is
goes from a
paying?
nickel to a dime, and that's why it doubles.
Yeah.
It goes from
No,
a nickel to a
that's
dime.
not what she
And I
said.
wanna, I can draw you a matrix in a minute, we can do all that, but, the current program is roughly, the state pays a third, the federal government's pay 2/3. Under the expansion program, at its most expensive, the state pays 10%, the feds pay 90. So, I don't think that double is the correct word, but I think it is fair that there would be an increased cost to the state. So regardless of what we do, the state is going to pay it's going to have a new expenditure. That's the reality. But it's a value judgment. We have to decide, is the cost worth it? And are we going to cover, are we spending money elsewhere that we could be spending on this that would make the system better? And that's a decision that the state has to make. So, I can get you, we can work on the math at some point and sort of see how this all works out.
It's not 20% of the budget.
It cannot be 20%
It's
of
not
the state's
20%.
budget.
And I'm not gonna argue with her over what her budget numbers are, because she looks at that a lot more than I do.
That's a scary tool.
But
I think we've got time for one last question, a quick question for that, and then we have got to wrap up. We want to be respectful of your time. But this is a fabulous conversation, and we need all of your ambassadors to be informed. And you see there is a lot coming on the horizon that we will need your help to advocate and ask these tough questions like Jerry just did of our elected officials. One last, make it really quick question, and then Matt wrap us up.
Okay. So to, I guess, expand on what Jerry was saying and what folks have said earlier about the hidden cost for the uninsured, are there talking points, or is there a way to capture that, the budget impact, because we're already paying for it?
Mhm.
So you acknowledge that saying it doubles the budget isn't accurate. I understand not wanting to challenge her on her numbers, but is there a way to shape and frame the conversation and put talking points that includes, we're already paying for it anyway.
Yep.
It is not going to double the budget, and give some realistic guidelines around maybe some of the intangibles that are going on by not providing health care.
yeah, I think without being forced into a conversation around numbers, I think that it is accurate to say that the problem still affects every Georgian, regardless of if you have health care coverage today or not. Your costs are going up right now because of the uncompensated care pass-through, essentially. And premiums are going up, co-pays are going up, cost of health care is going up. It already affects us today through our time and through our money, and that this truly is an economic development issue, and that the states that create an effective and efficient healthcare delivery system are going to be better positioned to grow their economy. So I personally would try to stay away from getting into conversations around 10% versus 20%. Does it really double? I don't think that's in the hearts and minds argument. I don't know that that always works really well. And I think that if you're not a budget wonk, you're always gonna be having a hard time trying to talk to a legislator about the subject that they know the most about. So to the greatest extent possible, what I've tried to do, and what I would say I'll try to do, is try to humanize and personalize this. Talk about the individual cases people who are your friends and family in your community, who are hardworking members of the community, who are doing everything that we ask them to do as productive members of society, and they're caught in this coverage gap. To the extent that you can find those individuals and present them in this is a real person, that's where I would say that can be a very effective tool. Thanks, man.
So you can tell that we have a lot of work to do, and one of the best partners that is engaged is the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, because they've brought a a different approach to the conversation at a statewide level that hospitals couldn't do just on our own. But what I want to do, just close with here, and then have John come up and make just a couple final remarks, is speak to the Grady strategy and bring this back to Grady and what role you play in this bigger conversation. Because while we will all be participants in the state and federal conversation that's happening, there is a lot of uncertainty, as Representative Cooper acknowledged. And for Grady, our focus is really on the fundamentals and the care and services we provide to the members of the residents of Fulton and DeKalb County and the surrounding region. We rely on county funding to pay for that uncompensated care. And as Representative Abrams said, this is a local conversation. Everybody here, and what I find across the state is almost everyone is, instead of 6 degrees of separation from Grady, there's about 2 to 3 degrees of separation from Grady. And if we can all engage in the conversation of how important it is to keep Grady healthy and sustainable in the long term, especially as there's uncertainty at the federal level that influences the decisions made at the state level, that's the number one thing we can do. So we'll be engaging with the county commissioners to continue to keep their support levels stable. They've begun their budget process for 2017. They've indicated that they're going to be stable, but voters approved 2 new cities, one in South DeKalb and one in South Fulton, or kind of East DeKalb. And that could have an impact on their budget. And a lot of times the first place they look to cut is Grady. And we want to help keep their commitment to keep us stable moving forward. The second part is working with the state to not cut Medicaid rates. So Medicaid is a big part of the budget, but don't make cuts to it as they may propose to do some things within their state budget with Medicaid rates. So we're going to continue to focus on how does Grady get paid and stay whole in this conversation. And then as Congress starts looking at a repeal and replace, the latest information I have, which is subject to change, is that the real votes will probably happen around the time frame of June of next year, but there's going to be a big conversation over the next 6 months about how to repeal and replace Obamacare. And we're going to want to be front and center with our congressional delegation, which are the folks that will participate in this conversation. Congressman Lewis has a good position. He may even be ranking member on the minority side in the Health Subcommittee for House Ways and Means. Senator Isaacson serves on the Senate Finance Committee, where all health legislation in the country will go through the Senate. And so the relationships that we have with these leaders and that we communicate as the conversation develops really has an impact. And you heard Representative Abrams when she said it's creating that culture, building that popular culture around something. And if we can continue to build a popular culture around Grady and the need to care for the folks that we serve, that's just the most important thing moving forward. And what I commit to do, and Jocelyn, who's on my team in government relations, is keep you informed. And I know Renee will do the same, so that when you can be most impactful, other than every other conversation you have on a general basis, but we will send out an action alert and say, this is what's happening, can you help us? And I'm so glad to see that's 100%, because we'll be calling on you more and more, especially as this conversation picks up. John, so thank you very much.
Well, a huge thanks to you, Matt, and our representatives, Jason and Brad, for an incredibly informative conversation. Real quick, though, Matt will definitely take you up on getting that information as the discussion progresses. An easy way to give, as Renee mentioned, the Adopt a Grady Department program. It's a really easy way to give now, but again, thank you all for being here, for what you do for Grady, for being part of this Ambassador Force, and we'll see you next year.